we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another book discussion between the Unerased Book Club and the Ann Arbor District Library. We are very excited to be here tonight discussing a novel which is called Mother Ocean, Father Nation, and this is by Nishant Batsha. And before we get started with our discussion, we'll just do a quick introduction of who we are. I am Lucy, and I work at the library. I'm a library tech in the youth department. I have shoulder-length brown hair and green glasses and a striped shirt, and I'm sitting in front of a wall of watercolors.
I'm Emily. I am a librarian here at Ann Arbor District Library. I'm a white woman in my mid-30s. I've got long, wavy, reddish hair. I'm wearing a green sweater, and I'm sitting in front of a mostly white wall with a Matisse print in the background.
Hi, folks. I'm Fatema. I am one of the co-facilitators for Unerased Book Club. I am a South Asian woman in her 30s, and I have a digital background of very fluffy pink clouds and a blue sky.
And my name is Jacob. I am in the outreach department at Ann Arbor District Library. I am a 29-year-old white male with blonde hair sitting in front of my green bookshelf and the white wall.
And hi, everyone. I'm Sheela. I'm the founder of the book club, the co-facilitator with Fatema. And I am a Indian American woman with light brown skin, black hair past my shoulders, glasses, and I am sitting in front of a landscape photo. And I'm really, really excited to talk about this book today. It is so Mother Ocean, Father Nation is a novel, like Lucy said. The plot, so that way everyone's on the same page before we have a discussion, is about two siblings who are they're of Indian descent on a fictional Pacific Island nation, and are dealing with the aftermath of the imperial power leaving and the upheaval and reorganization of government and society that throws their hyper visible but hyper minoritized Indian community into flux, impacting them personally. And the book is about what happens to two siblings, one who is able to flee to the United States as a refugee, and the other who is stuck on said fictional island. So as we always like to start these conversations, what did you guys think of this book?
I thought it was a really beautiful read. That's the word I keep coming back to. Part of it is the cover. You maybe saw it for a second when Lucy held it up. It's just an absolutely beautiful book. So I went into it just ready to go along for the ride. And the writing style, while not necessarily propulsive writing, it wasn't, oh, I got to get to the next chapter because I'm wondering what's going to happen next. At the same time, it just had a beautiful pace of it that really fit my reading needs, because I wanted to keep reading, but I was able to take my time with it because I wasn't so, oh my gosh, what is going to happen next, that I could sit and just sit with the words. So I found it an enlightening reading experience, and perhaps different from what I just pick up day to day.
Yes, and although the setting in the book is in turmoil and it's violent, something that I was taken aback by while reading the book is just the beauty of where they were. And I think that that's reflected in the writing itself. I also just love books that you start reading them and they just get slowly gayer. I'm like, oh, there's bisexuals here. This is good. I like that. So that's my initial thoughts about the book.
Yeah, I loved this book. Like you were saying, Emily, there's something about, well, both of you were talking about the writing, but like, I just couldn't wait to get back to it, I guess. Like I was very aware of the fact that I was reading this really good book, and I was looking forward to picking it up. And everything I read in here, I would be talking about to my husband. I'm like, and then this happened, and then this happened, just because it's such a familiar. I mean, you've heard this situation, I feel like, described, but then to read all the nuances of it and the very specific rules and it just was really interesting and sometimes difficult, but so well written. And just I thought the characters were really, really well developed, and just everything about it. I felt like it was really easy to just come back to reading it and enjoy it.
I also just really enjoyed reading the book, and I think the writing helped us care about the characters quite a bit, and that's what propelled me to continue reading. That you're reading about this conflict that's affecting an entire country and multiple groups of people, but I think that it was the personal touch of like watching this family go through this journey that really helped, as well as the writer's description of everything. I thought that it was just very well done. And Jacob, to your point of like it just becoming gay as the novel progressed, I think this is definitely one of the more explicit queer books that we've read, where there are explicit scenes. And that was just an enjoyable surprise. I wasn't prepared for that when I head into this book. I hadn't read anything about it before I read it for the first time, and I was like, oh, okay, so there's this is wonderful. Not at all what I expected, and I'm here for it, especially for a book that takes place in like the 1980s.
Yeah, so I think I've talked about this on these calls before, but whenever I go to visit my parents in Missouri, my mom will check out a bunch of books before I arrive, just like to kind of give me like a welcome platter of literature, which is very sweet of her. And this was one of the books last summer that she had ready for me. And I will say it's like 50% hit, 50% miss. But her thing is, if Sheela reads it and recommends it to me, then I don't have to go through the trouble of figuring it out myself. And Lucy, I had the inverse reaction to reading this book that you had, where when I read something that's so well written and just keeps me engaged, I don't want to talk about it with anybody else, because I want to bottle that my own reaction and my own like world building that this book laid out for us. And when I read it, I know it's in a South Pacific island area, but I kept thinking about all the like touch points in Sri Lanka and my friends who are Indo-Caribbean, and the culture of kind of bodies for hire and the expendable nature of bodies as well. Is something I saw in Sri Lanka, and it's also very, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and go off on a tangent already, but very related to a book I'm reading right now called this 7 Moons of Mali Almeida, which won the Man Booker Prize last year. And very, very similar, like explorations of how are people's bodies commodified, and then how are they let to waste, and how are individuals trying to reclaim their own bodies as theirs. Which is much bigger themes that are explored throughout all like this book, 7 Moons, and then Lucky Boy, which we read in 2020. I had got similar feels from that book as well. So I'm just curious, like, did this book prompt any moments of, oh, this feels like another book I read? And if so, which other books? Because I don't know, like this book was both very specific and also very broad.
Yes. And I really just have to start off by saying I'm so thankful to have been reading these books with you guys for, has it been years? A year? Because I'm
more than a year, yeah.
What the heck? I'm reading this book and they're not saying where it's set. And I go, okay, I read Antiman. And I remember in that book, I learned about Guyana and how the UK shipped Indian people over there to work the land. I said, is that it? I said, no, it's an island. It's like Sri Lanka, because I read that on My Sweet Girl. I know that. And then I was like, wait, this is something totally new. And then I just reflected on it, and I was just so thankful to have this wealth of information and knowledge in the ways of the world that I did not have before, and I would never have had unless I did this stuff with y'all. That was crazy. I was like, damn. I mean, I was like, whoa. But it reminded me of Antiman because
I grabbed that because I was like, there's just, it was this, because I think that's where we learned about, like Guyana and the Indian culture there. So that's a really well said and nice way to put that, Jacob, and I agree wholeheartedly. I also thought about Passage West, which we read a while ago, just because it was about, Indians, indentured people moving somewhere and being used for work. So that one came to mind as well.
And that's a family saga too. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you're good. I'm taking it just in a slight around the corner, which is that reading books make me realize what garbage history I learned in school, or maybe not a bad version of something, but how many things got skipped over. And I'm so grateful for, first of all, to just have literature to help open my eyes and realize what I'm missing, but then to have the very easy resource of Wikipedia. Because what I find is when I'm reading books like this and I go, gee, this is something big that happened in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Those were probably the weakest parts in our history in school, at least for me growing up, that I know nothing about. But I'm pretty sure it's real. And the fact that I don't even necessarily know that it's real, to then go and do the research and learn a little bit more about this. So this book really opened that up for me. And I thought it was an interesting, because reading it and not getting any specifics about the name of the island, I went and did a little Googling and I found the article that was the first article that y'all listed on the resources for this. It was an interview. And I highly recommend, if folks are watching this before reading the book, I recommend reading that before you read the book or after you've read the first couple chapters, because it really helped give me both context with what story I was reading, but then what other things I needed to look up to fill in the gaps in my history. And there's still obviously so much that I haven't learned, and I really should just stop blaming school for not teaching me and instead keep picking up these books that inspire me to go learn and teach myself, because it's an amazing amount that is just washed over that we don't hear about in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. I also, as I was reading this, I kept thinking about Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, because that's about the Nigerian Civil War, and the way that's written gave me a very similar vibe to this book, where it was like character driven, but you could still feel the effects of a war on a family and a group of people. And then I also thought about Bengali Harlem, which is a historical book of Indian Bengalis moving to America and integrating into America, like coming in ships as coolies, and then slowly merging with local communities, finding refuge in Puerto Rican and Black families all across the Eastern Seaboard, essentially. So, but that is more of a historical text and not a novel. But yeah, those were the two that I was really reminded of, and I have mixed feelings about Chimamanda Ngozi now, but I'm going to set that aside and just say that was still an excellent read, though. Yeah.
That was an excellent read. And I agree with your assessment of the author. But yeah, this other is also brought, like, specifics of this book brought other books to mind too. Just the idea, I feel like I've read a lot of books recently where there has been the idea of people being disappeared by like the power that be. I read a couple of books by Carolina Di Robertes. One of them took place in Argentina and one of them took place in Uruguay during like, dictatorships. And then I read a book called Girl at War that was about the Bosnian conflict, and just this idea of like this word and this use of this word of like, it's a very specific thing, that people are being disappeared by the ruling power. And I just thought about that a couple of times in this book when we were hearing about the awful ways that people got disappeared. So there were a lot of books that like pieces of this would bring up.
I want to touch on well, the first thing is the idea of being disappeared and how it's always used to talk about folks with, or like people who with visibility, people who are making a splash enough that the ruling powers want to silence it. But on the flip side, there's so many people who aren't doing anything really against a political power that are disappeared every day by like just other forces, and we don't call it just being disappeared because they're not seen as like important enough. And this has nothing really to do with the book as much as it's just sparked like what is the difference in the terminology, and what's like the political like there's political violence, and I guess there's just casual everyday violence of people going missing. And it feels like it's more palatable to read about political violence than the everyday violence, because I can't think off the top of my head of a lot of books that aren't true crimey, that talk about that violence, that everyday somebody going missing. I mean, and now that I say that, I actually think it's the Roundhouse by Louise Eldridge, like that. There's one of the plot lines is about a sister going missing, which is everyday violence against Native women. Or the Watchmen, not the Roundhouse, sorry, the Watchmen. It's
I think it happens in the Roundhouse, or there's maybe someone's murdered in the Roundhouse as well. So
yeah, it's casual violence.
right.
But then everybody brought up the characters, and I'm really curious what you all thought about Bumi and the sister and Jay, the brother in this book, or the parents or peripheral characters that influence their lives. So I'll just leave it open-ended because I don't want to color that conversation.
I love reading books about sibling dynamics where the relationship is neither perfect and beautiful nor completely fraught in the worst things in their lives. And I thought it was really interesting thinking about the connection that these two felt, and maybe that their connection felt stronger when they were further apart. Now, perhaps that's what we're seeing in the story, but it seemed as though those phone calls and those attempts to reach each other, and realizing the one Jay at home with the parents and his uncertainty, and Bumi's being in a place all on her own, trying to make her way and continue her education in this new land, and that neither of them are living the life that they exactly hoped to. But they also have elements of each other's situations that they may be envious of. And to those little bits of connection where you saw, from reading one character's perspective, you saw them interact with the other character. Those were some of the parts of the book I enjoyed reading the most. And it was just getting to see the person whose head you've been in from their siblings' perspective.
And to talk about how they didn't have the best relationship or the worst relationship, I think something the author really did an amazing job of showing us is those moments where like you're saying goodbye to someone for forever. You don't have this big emotional outpouring. And he kind of touched on that throughout the book, where it's like where Bumi and Jay finally, like when Bumi flew to America, he was like, "I'll miss you." And she was like, "Yeah, you too." And I'm like, that's like the truest, like, you don't know what to say in those moments. You don't know how to express yourself. And I think that's just, I know I've said it a million times now, but that's just very true to life. And I appreciated that.
I really loved this relationship. And it made me think a lot about my own sibling relationships, where it's like we took very different paths from each other, like the choices that we made. Like I pursued education to a larger degree than my brother did, and just some of the unsaid things that happened. So it was really cool to see them, and then seeing also like their bond when they were younger and how it shifted because of the parents and the influences thereof. And it was really, I was very touched by it. I thought it was so well done. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that what you're saying about the parents and like how the parents change the dynamic of their relationship, I think that one thing, and this book really shows you, but the thing that like siblings, no matter if they are getting along really well or they're far apart or they're not getting along, but one thing that they share uniquely is that they have the same set of parents. And so there are certain things that only they can understand about why things happen the way they do. And then there are other things which they perceive differently. It's like Boomy thinks that Jay has it better because he has all this freedom. And then when she gets away, she's like, actually, like he had all my dad's attention on him. And that was a prison in and of itself, and then you think about her experience with her father, which is basically like she compares it to sort of being almost like being a survivor of being in a war type experience. Like she knows how to handle, or she's experienced like such trauma from her father that other things she can like call back on that. And that takes that distance between them for them to see what the other's experience was like, but they still, only they know like how their mother and father get along. It was really well done. I think that presence of their parents and what an effect it had on their siblingship, but also how it was something that only the two of them could really understand.
So I think that I had that relationship in the back of my mind. My brother and I are not close. We do not talk to each other. And I am now seeing very explicitly where the friction came from within our family dynamics. With my parents, like spending a lot more time with me and my new child, and seeing like not even like glimpses, but like in your face mirroring between like how my father behaves and how my brother behaves, and why, like how they treat, like I guess just how they treated me differently, even though we came from the same household and should not have been, and they say they didn't treat us differently. And really getting that type of dynamic mirrored in a book feels so rare, because like Emily said, the sibling relationship in so many novels is like, oh, they're best friends, or they grow to get to know each other over time. It's like, no, sometimes you're just two people who were born from the same people, or the same parents, and that's just what it is. And I like that. I really appreciated seeing a complicated parental relationship as well that didn't really resolve. It was just, well, father's gone now.
I think that also, it's like, this is the first time I've read a book where they talked about an abusive parent, but also talked about the attachment to the parent in a way that felt very realistic to me. And I guess for our listeners that are watchers, just a warning, this book does have domestic violence content in it. And I haven't seen that where, like we all have very complicated parents that we might have mixed emotions about, and some of us have like parents who did a lot of wrong and harm to us. And yet there's still that attachment, there's still that closeness and desire for closeness, or even just like something that it feels irrevocable in a way. And I think this book and the relationship that he writes really captured that for me, where I was like, when Boomy cries because when she hears about her father's death, I mean, if you were to just look at it from this thing of like, no, this was an abusive parent and you should totally cut them off of kind of point of view, she wouldn't have cried. But there was that feeling of loss regardless. And I appreciated seeing that all throughout the book.
I think that was also reflected by their mother, the mother's relationship with the father, like especially in the end, she's like, her thinking around it was like, he has left me so many times, essentially gone off on these nights, and I know what he's been doing, and he's been with other people, and I'm not gonna leave him. Like it was this, her idea of staying with him and her loyalty to sticking with it, but that was also like intertwined with the fact that he had constantly left her. It was very complicated, but she was very attached to him, and I think that was really well portrayed, and just like the how difficult that was, and how it wasn't just like she, like you're saying, like, oh, I'm glad he's gone, or I'm not glad he's gone. Just there was so much there, and it just seemed really real.
I also, to the point of like him being very nuanced, I also love that being queer on an island in this Indian community was not making them an otherized, right, character. It was so well done, so normalized, just so, it was so lovely to read, you know, even when there was homophobic language or actions and trauma associated sometimes, but I thought that the fact that he normalized it so much, just the way that he wrote it, was very powerful. And I love to see that, because a lot of times we have to fight against this notion of these things didn't exist during these time periods, or these people didn't like experience it the same way. And I really appreciated just having that out there. And I know, like we had spoke about Passage West earlier, one of the books we'd read last year?
It was last year, maybe.
Yeah. And in that one, the author shied away from that. I mean, in the interview with the author, Rishi Reddy, we had asked, you know, like, there were some queer vibes between these characters. Like, was that your intention? And she was like, yes, it was. I just didn't know how they would have followed up with it in that time. And I think that Nishant Batsha just like went there, and I'm so grateful that he did. And it was beautiful. I loved it.
Yeah, I think, and one of the most loving relationships in a way was this relationship between these two men. It really was beautiful.
I think part of what made it so beautiful is that the friendship was also there as its own thing. And so often with books, whether they are queer relationships or not, the relationship becomes the romantic relationship becomes the sole definition of that relationship. And even then looking back, you're like, yeah, of course they were setting this up. All right. Versus this, their romantic relationship and their friendship, of course, you know, as they do in real life, usually have some kind of melding, that their connection was more than just attraction and romance. It was also a deep friendship.
I had a confusing reaction to what you had said, Fatema, because as much as I enjoyed that in this book, the queer vibes were spoken, I also really appreciated in Passage West that they were unspoken. And I can't figure out why I feel that way about the two different situations. And I don't know what it says about, I don't know, being queer or being or queerness in literature. But it's weird to say there's almost a place for both. I don't know what those places are, but I just had such a complex reaction to what you had said. And I'm just kind of just like, whoa.
Now that you're saying it, I completely agree, because I think that I've definitely witnessed within my community and family that extended family, that there do exist like these really romanticized friendships that are deep and long lasting, and that don't have that internal debate of is this a queer thing or not, right? It just is, it exists, you know. And I think there is a lot of value in portraying that relationship as well. So yeah, your thought is on point. I think a part of me always longs for the explicit verbalization or action like of queerness, but yeah, you're right, because it's not always that way.
I think there's something to be said in knowing that you're in good hands with your author. And I haven't read Passage West, but from what I'm hearing, it feels like in reading that book, you felt like you were in good hands, that you weren't trying to be manipulated as a reader in any direction. And I think it's the same for this. And so it's easy to have two conflicting feelings when you are going along with an author that you can trust.
It was not queer baiting. I just want to make that clear. It was definitely not queer baiting because
Sounds
I
like
really like
so.
that
Oh,
idea. Oh, sorry, I was just saying. I
no,
was
no,
just saying,
please,
Emily,
please,
like,
Lucy.
I really like that idea of thinking about feeling like you're in good hands with an author. I like that phrase, and I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
And so it sounds like everybody, myself included, appreciated the way that these characters were developed. And I would love to hear if anybody had any frustrations with the characters at any point. And Fatima just smiled, so I don't know if that was an immediate reaction or.
no, I have to really think about this.
I mean, I thought they had one of the opening scenes where Bhumi's like studying, and it's right before they're about to graduate or be done with school. And her friend wants them to go out past curfew, and it just felt very cliched of like the one time I do something bad, like everything spirals out. But considering like the rest of the novel isn't super clean, there's not a lot of I guess memorable cliches. We can let this one pass. But it did set me up to be on guard. And Emily, to your point, I don't know if I felt like I trusted Nishant at that point. I was like, my man, I don't want this to be like a whole like the domino effect of cliche plot points. But honestly just stressed me out. Like, can Boomy not go have fun for one night? Can we do like another scene where she goes out and tries to test the waters and then like everything goes to hell?
I was
It
definitely
wasn't-
waiting for the other shoe to drop quite a bit throughout the book.
And she did go in California. And it was not, you're right. I had not put those two together as, two sides of what happens when you decide to take a risk, and especially to take a risk with someone else out in the world where things can happen. And so it is nice thinking about how those risks she took in connecting with, oh gosh, what was his name? Was it Vikram?
Vic,
Vikram.
Yes. And connecting with him, and occasionally, the time that she took the lead and said, no, we just need to have a good time tonight. That was very satisfying to see that she wasn't the one time she decided to have a good time before and her whole life got ruined. It didn't prevent her from doing that. And I think that's why I so appreciated that, but I had not put it together until you talked about that first big scene.
And I know that I was frustrated with Jay as well, but that's because there was a lot of reminders of my own brother, and like this feeling of restlessness and just distrust and just vitriol towards the father figure. But I really grew to enjoy his character as we got to know more about him. But the again, like his opening scenes weren't fun for me either.
I really struggled with Jay's how he explains to himself the purpose of sex and how it is something for him to disappear in, but it also is something that and this verbiage is used throughout the book, that he takes. And I'm like, well, really complicated reaction to that, because as he's having sex with these tourists at the hotel in which he's employed, and his employment is serving these people, he's also using their bodies. It's what Sheela was talking about at the beginning, where it's like how bodies are used. And I had a complex reaction to, I was like, is that a healthy way to have sex? Is that cruel? But then I'm like, no. But then I'm like, yeah. It was, I struggled with that viewpoint, and I wonder if I misunderstood it. Is how much I struggled with it.
Could it also be said that like they are using his body as well? I mean, they, like that woman in the beginning, Portia, like she's in a place where she gets to leave, and he talks about that too, like later, these people, they all got to go somewhere and leave. And this was just a thing they came and did. It was vacation. And part of that experience for them now is having had sex with this guy who works at the hotel. So I don't know if there was like a little bit of both sides of it, but I do agree that I think Jay seemed like a very different character to me in the beginning of the book than he seemed like as we got to know him, and then towards the end of the book, like we're different people almost. Just his attitudes, but yeah, I think that the stuff happening in the hotel kind of, for me, it seemed like it went both ways.
Yes. Hearing you say that, I'm like, yeah, that's it. I think I was just triggered, to be honest.
And that's fair. I mean,
I think it's just like my little personal shebang.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about characters that frustrate me, Portia was definitely one of them, where it's just like not just this using of the body, but also just like she stole his words. She was writing a novel and she would often ask him, can I use this? I mean, it's not stealing because she asked, but it's also like you're taking, and it felt very exploitative to me. And yeah, I did not like it.
She reminded me of just that character reminds me of all of these places across the world that are beautiful but experience like the slightest tremor of chaos, and all the expats want to leave. The tourists and the expats are just like, nope, we're gone, we're good. And like really, when I lived in Colombo, I heard that a lot of like, well, if anything happens, even though the country didn't have real issues at that time, like, well, if anything happens, we can just pack up and leave. I'm like, how? Like, just like the disconnect, like, and like you're never going to form real relationships with people around you if your immediate thought is, I don't have the same vested interest in this place that you do. And I'm here to extract and then leave. And in Portia's case, extract like just sexual favors, extract like the sexual relationship from Jay and be like, okay, bye when things go wrong.
Wow.
We talk about the sense of home a lot in this group, and I think that how do you feel home if you are immediately looking to exit? And also, the sense of the characters here who the non-native, the Indian people who have still lived there their whole lives, that is their home more than anywhere they might flee to, but you can't stake any claim on what you feel is home. It really, gosh, it's a theme that just sits heavy.
I was actually very torn about that because, a part of me was thinking about this is obviously the consequences of empire, right? And all the colonialism, but also just feeling upset with the natives for the coup and everything they were doing, disappearing, people and all of that. But at the same time, also feeling like I get it. Because I get where they're coming from about like being so frustrated about having their land stolen and being socially and economically disadvantaged in their own land, and I felt that very complicated sense of like we're doing this thing here in the US where we're starting to acknowledge like on larger spaces that we are on indigenous land that has, unceded indigenous land. And what does that mean? Because I think about reparations all the time, but I also think about how I'm an immigrant here. I've made my home here. So it just brought up a lot of feelings about who or what belongs and how many generations of, like what counts and what doesn't, and what does it look like to have that, to bridge that divide. Yeah,
I felt like there was a real question of belonging in this book, which I think we talked about, like when we were talking about Passage West, like how long do you have to be in a place to belong there? But then I think that even extended in this book to like when Boomy goes to the United States, and you know, where does she belong there? And then where do the people she lives with belong? And I think there's this recognition of this like really close, like the culture is almost stronger there, she says, than in other places, like when they've moved, you know. But then you look at someone like Vikram, who has really assimilated. I mean, almost like he makes fun of her for clothes that she wears, that, you know, he calls her like fresh off the boat or whatever. But this like, so this belonging, I think it was sort of, for me, it seemed like it was throughout the whole book, this question of belonging. But I do think it's something that we've covered a lot in a lot of these books.
What was the most surprising part of this book for you all? I mean, I know for me, I think the exploration of Jay's sexuality and how he uses it to make money, to like get by, and not in a explicitly like sex worker way. It's just like, this is an understood part of like the hospitality business, which is just very different. It's a very different framing. And it wasn't surprising, like the concept of it. I had been exposed to this type of sex work in other contexts or in other books, but to see it in a book like this type of book was that was surprising to me. Like I thought it was going to be more about family dynamics, and then bam, he was actually like, no, screw you guys, I'm going to go do my own thing to make sure that I can take care of myself.
It was surprising in a good way, but I found it so satisfying and warmed my heart that Boomy found the path to continue her education. It really seemed that was going to be one of the big sacrifices of this book. Not that it was a sacrifice she chose to make. And so to see her make those connections, and I just kept expecting it to drop, and that the professor wouldn't want to work with her. Instead, the professor paves the way for her. And that was so often when you're reading stories about the big tragic things in our time, sometimes then everything has to be the worst outcome. And to see that the botany that was so important to her and woven throughout the book, that she was able to not just continue her education, but continue her education on that path, was surprising and wonderful.
I think we've already kind of touched on this, but the queerness and the normalization of it, I was so pleased to see that, but it was also very surprising because that's not what I was looking for when I picked up this book, but that's not what I was prepared for. You know, there's nothing that hinted at it. So I appreciated that a lot. And also like explicit sex. I feel like we haven't read that either that much in this book club. And I thought it was well done. Yeah.
The description of sex were so poetic. That was something that surprised me. I guess that's my entire thought.
Poetic, but not romanticized, like in a cliche way.
I'm actually just thinking about how like puritanical most American literature or film, or like just visual culture, continues to be, and how people like lose their minds if there's like a sex scene. Meanwhile, like throughout Europe, just like it's very normal, and it's just part of like the plot. And that puritanical like values has been really embodied in Asian American literature, where it's like we still don't have we don't have literature that includes sex or includes like sexuality as like viable plot points, unless it is explicitly a romance novel.
Or it's about exploring your sexual identity, right? Like explicitly about that.
And I think that in Western literature and media in general, we'll let sex be a plot point, but it will be negative. It will be sexual abuse. It will be something dark. It won't be something. If we use it as a plot point, it's not like sex is great. It's like sex is terrible.
Which, I mean, I hate to bring up book bans that are happening across the country, but that's the crux of it, is to show like joy and happiness and like consent and anything positive remotely related to queer experiences and queer sex and sexuality. Because God forbid we like normalize that it is a real part of our society, and that it's good for young adults to see that it's like you're not going to bring shame to yourself or your family if you explore that part of yourself. Yeah. I was feeling really annoyed about the stuff that's happening in Lapeer County and like across the country. Like Lapeer County's prosecutor is going to go after a librarian for having a queer young adult book. And she's like, well, we also have The Joy of Sex in this library, and you're not going after that. If you want to come after me, you know where to find me. I'm in the library serving my patrons. So just like I read that this morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
I was thinking about banned books in the beginning of this discussion, even when Emily, when you were saying that you think that there are so many like holes of things that you didn't learn, and immediately my mind went to like this, and yet now we're trying to take all this information away from people. I mean, both in what is being decided, what can be taught in schools and not taught in schools, but also like when you ban books, again, like all that erasure that then happens as well, and how much you can actually learn from books, and especially if you see yourself in them, you know, that's helpful. But it's interesting just that like that was a thought that the whole banned book thing popped into my head at the very beginning of this discussion.
Or defund libraries, because I will say that that's one of the bigger causes, and it flies far more under the radar than banned books, which gets a lot more press. But I think the defunding, and closing of libraries especially. So, and when I was living in Detroit, that was something that, you know, growing up in Detroit, that was something that was a constant threat. There were periods of time when the libraries were shut down where I was, and that was really like, I wouldn't be the reader I am today if I didn't have access to the library, right? So it was just, yeah, I definitely think about that a lot.
So I think we've kind of naturally rounded out our thoughts on Mother Ocean, Father Nation. Fatema and I will be speaking to Nishant next week, I think. Yes, next Tuesday. Yes. And so if anybody on this call, or I mean, I don't know if this will be posted by 21st, but if you know of anybody else who has questions, please let us know. We're happy to add them to our list for the author. But if there are any, I would like to just end it with any other final thoughts. Well, with that, thank you everybody so much for participating, engaging, reading this book, and continuing to, with us, expand our notion of what is history, what is place, what is home.